I'm just so excited tonight to be able to have Meade Cadot share some stories from his long time with the Harris Center. He really made the Harris Center what it is today, and without Meade's guidance and his vision and his skill at finessing the land deals and conservation opportunities, the Harris Center would really not be here the way it is today. And so I'm always just so grateful to him, not only because he taught me everything I know about scat, but he's also just a wonderful educator and person, and I'm just thrilled tonight. So he's gonna tell us stories. We have some slides that we're gonna be sharing that illustrate parts of his story. So Meade, before we get going on your tales, I think this slide has so much, there's so much you in it. Can you just tell us a little bit about this slide?
Well, sure. This wasn't taken here in New Hampshire. I was teaching, I taught for many years, most of my time while I was director of the Harris Center. In fact, all of it. I was also teaching for the Antioch New England Graduate School. And way back in the 70s, we had a lot of students from New York City that would come up and go to classes on Thursday, throw out a sleeping bag on the floor at the Harris Center, and then stay over and then have classes on Friday and go back to New York. Well, some of them were really kind of interested in getting back to New York more often. And there was one fellow named Ted Levin, who's become a rather renowned writer, at the time said, well, why don't we have an urban ornithology class? Will you be the leader for that? Hell, I didn't know anything about New York, but I said, okay, I'll go, sure. So anyway, we went down to New York, and we watched what do you call them? The things that come out of the back of a jet plane, crossing with ibises and herons near the airport where the wildlife refuge is that used to be a municipal landfill. And eventually we got out to Long Island, and there Ted had a friend with a fish crow, and he insisted on sticking it on my head and taking a picture. So that's the history.
I love that. I love that. So tonight, Meade, you're going to be telling us 3 stories, and each story will stop after each story. And if you have any questions as he's telling a story that you want to ask about that story, you can chat Miles under the chat function, and we'll have a chance for some questions and answering after each story. So, all right, Meade.
All right. Well, the first story begins with Henry Fuller. Henry was already retired as a very successful Wall Street broker and living in Nelson when I first met him. He was living in a house that he inherited from his uncle. It's a great place that overlooked the hillside meadow just above the village square. And more than once he invited me to come over, sometimes for a party, but sometimes just to sit on the porch, admire the view, and talk about Harris Center land protection efforts in Nelson, which in his neighborhood began in the early 90s. Henry had more than 100 acres, including a lot of road frontage and more than 1,300 feet on scenic Center Pond. So he was obviously interested in seeing the land protected. And by 1994, with the help of his attorney, Kim Zachos, he had a plan for the future of his land, and it was a little complicated. Over the course of 2 years, he gave us conservation easements protecting most of his land, including the 46-acre parcel with the Center Pond shoreline and his house. Then, in his estate plans, he left the 46 acres plus 17 more to Dartmouth, 13 acres to the Currier Art Gallery in his hometown of Manchester, and 18 acres to the town of Nelson, all protected by conservation easements given us. The result was we ended up with 94 acres to monitor, split among 4 fee owners. I have to confess that I didn't push hard back in those days for stewardship contributions, but Henry did give us $5,000 between 1995 and 2000. By the summer of 2001, Henry was deceased, alas, and the lion's share of his huge estate became the Currier Art Gallery's largest ever bequest. It included a prized collection of works by noted 19th century American painters, along with his huge collection of paperweights. And last but definitely not least, $20 million for the purposes of buying art. Also by 2001, another important figure, Virginia Baker had become a huge supporter of the Harris Center and the SuperSanctuary. In fact, I called her the Harris Center's fairy godmother. That year, there was a fire where she lived, and it was successfully brought under control, but she realized that it could have destroyed an important piece of art given her as a wedding gift by her grandmother-in-law. It's a still life painting called A Royal Dessert. It was done by Irish-born painter William Michael Hartman in 1881. And he became a leading late 19th century American painter and was the subject of a major exhibition in 1992, which traveled to the Met in New York and to the National Gallery of Art in DC. So A Royal Dessert was considered quite valuable, and it hadn't been on display since it was exhibited in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in 1883. By 2004, Mrs. B, which she liked to be called, had an ingenious plan to give the painting a safer home and a wider audience, and give the Harris Center a huge boost too. So in 2005, she donated the painting to the Currier, but not entirely. She gave the Currier 25% interest, gave the rest of the interest to us. Well, guess what? The Currier couldn't exhibit 25% of a painting. So after about a year of negotiations and appraisal work, the Harris Center received a check drawn from the Currier's Henry Melville Fuller Acquisition Fund for $412,500. So although Henry's $5,000 for conservation easement stewardship was small potatoes relative to his means, the ingenious way Mrs. B served up a royal dessert enabled both the still life to move to the Currier and the move of more than $400,000 of full of fortune back to our region for the support of the Harris Center and the SuperSanctuary. So actually, a few years later, in recognition of all the great work Mrs. B had done for the SuperSanctuary, we designated the area around Rye Pond as the Virginia Baker Natural Area. As you're driving by 123 between Hancock Village and Route 9, you'll pass it. The pond itself is only 13 acres, but it lies in 2 counties and 3 towns, and is regionally recognized for its acid fen with black spruce, rose begonia orchids, and other uncommon bog-dwelling plants. So it's a neat spot to visit. Oh yeah, there's even a moose in the rye. So that's the end of that story.
So Miles, are there any questions for Meade?
I didn't get many chats, but where is the Currier Art Museum?
In Manchester.
Manchester. And what can you see there today? When is the last time you went?
You can, Sandy and I have gone to see it ourselves. And you can also see his paperweight collection, 400 paperweights.
I did a little research on that.
Yeah, it's a great museum. You know, if you're into art, a lot of people go there.
Here's a question from Frank. What is the SuperSanctuary?
Okay, well, the SuperSanctuary started as a concept. You know, back in the mid '80s, when we got the Briggs Preserve protected, and the Harris Center was in charge of managing it, and then we got a lot of land protected around Spoonwood and New Manooset, but there was a gap in between. So we had, a couple of pods, and I thought, well, it would be great to sort of connect them together with the Willard Pond Audubon Sanctuary, where I had first lived when I came to the Monadnock region. And so that was the initial dream. Well, that happened long ago, and it just kept going and going and going. I don't know what the latest tally is. North of 20,000 acres, I know that. So the idea was SuperSanctuary, meaning super, over and above the Willard Pond Sanctuary. That's how the original name came to be.
Meade, I know that when I've heard you talk about it, you talk a lot about how important it is for protected land to be contiguous for wildlife. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
for birds, they can fly across Route 9 or Route 123, but it's not so easy for a moose or a bobcat or a bear. So it's really good to have contiguous protected land right up to the edges of those roads. And you know, even from something small land birds like a black-throated blue warbler, there have been studies done that show if you want to maintain a population of a black-throated blue warbler, you need more than 2,000 acres of contiguous unbroken forest land. So that's the thinking behind it. It's called, you know, it's room to roam. You know, a lot of critters need it, bobcats especially. Black bears are a really good example because they need not only a lot of room, but they need different kinds of land at different kinds of year. Like now, right now they need wetlands, then soon they'll want the berry patches, and then in the fall they'll want the mature forest land for acorns and beech nuts and so forth. So you have to have all that different kinds of habitat all connected so that the critters can get to it.
Great, thanks, Meade. Maybe we're ready for the next story. A phone call to Fairbanks. What's this? Fairbanks doesn't seem very New Hampshire-y.
No, there was a time period there when it seemed like every time I went away, some kind of a disaster would crop up. This is kind of the example. So this was early, this was in June of 2003, and I was co-leading an Antioch Field Studies trip to Alaska, and midway through our itinerary, we were staying right here at the University of Alaska. I really remember it very well, receiving a phone call around midnight. I was watching my students playing Frisbee, and it looked just like that, plenty of daylight. It was a kind of a frantic phone call that I received from Michael Island. He and his wife, Alabama, and his mother, and Kia, have protected maybe a little more, half the shoreline of Center Pond by giving us conservation easements. I don't know how he tracked me down, but in a very excited voice, Michael explained that a developer had just purchased a large tract of land on the Lead Mine and Apple Hill Road, which directly abutted the Apple Hill Center for Chamber Music. And even more troubling, that the purchase came with a 16-acre house lot development plan called Phase 1. Nearly ready to take to the planning board. Michael was sure this would be terrible for Apple Hill and would be an, quote, an environmental and financial disaster, end quote, for the town as a whole. What can you do to stop it, he asked. First I blurted, but Michael, I'm in Alaska. Then I said, I'd think about it. As soon as I got back, I arranged a meeting with Bud French and Bert Wingerson of the Nelson Conservation Commission, plus a couple of other concerned townspeople, to discuss how we might minimize the financial and environmental impact of the development, which was on 225 acres with 2,000 feet of road frontage. And we came out of that meeting with a strategy and a plan and a close partnership between the Harris Center and the Conservation Commission. Given our uncertain financial resources, the developers' expectations we knew were high, we decided that realistically our best bet was to buy a conservation easement, one that would still allow 4 houses to be located along the road, but not in a 172-acre conservation zone, protecting the ridge above the road and beyond that, the biologically diverse and scenic Black Brook Stream Valley and riparian wetland. The question then was, what would such an easement cost? And would the developer agree to such a deal? So for this question, we enlisted the help of 2 people, real estate appraiser John Newcomb and attorney Tom Hanna. Tom had worked for the developer on other matters, so we thought he would be a good person to deliver our proposal and explain the rationale behind it. John made an estimate valuing the conservation easement to be worth somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000, which is the figure Tom used, taking it to the developer. Well, we didn't know what would happen, but he accepted our offer, albeit at the high end of the range. It was really a win-win for both of us, both buyer and seller. It was a win for him because he would avoid a lengthy, expensive battle with the town planning board, and he would avoid the road building and other infrastructure costs that he would have incurred in creating a 16-lot subdivision. But we weren't out of the woods yet because we had to raise $100,000, pretty quickly. Fortunately for all of us, the Conservation Commission, a few years before, 1999, received a request named the Partridge Fund, and the commission voted to contribute from the fund a quarter of the cost, $25,000. Apple Hill stepped up with a $5,000 contribution and pledged to donate it, conservation easement on its 48 acres. And a very generous anonymous donor offered to match $20,000 of additional donations. To close the deal within the agreed upon time, we had to borrow from our Spoonwood Fund. But by the end of 2004, we had received some 65 contributions, a dozen donors giving us $1,000 or more. So the Spoonwood Fund was replenished and we could all cheer for the partnership's success. And just so happens a decade or so later, with Jeremy at the Harris Center helm, the partnership was back in action, protecting 588 acres of wild and scenic highlands, including the summit of Osgood Mountain, second highest peak in Cheshire County. And I think the grand opening of Partridge Woods just happened last year.
Wow, that's a great story. I love all the twists and turns and Michael tracking you down. Miles, are there any questions for Meade?
Where does Black Brook go? Like, where does it start and where does it end?
Boy, you know, I'm not that good enough in the backcountry of Nelson to tell you. Maybe there's somebody watching that can. I know when they did their plan of what land should be protected, it was high on the list. And it's not that far. It sort of parallels Apple Hill Road. So if you just go, you know, up the ridge and keep going, you'll come to it.
And Apple Hill, that's a farm. How does the chamber music become a part of that?
I don't know why. I mean, it was a farm at one time. That's where the chamber music has their concerts, and it's where they teach their lessons and all that stuff. And having the comings and goings of 26 lot subdivision next door would not be great for the ambient sound.
Also, Richard was thinking about that first picture for a while, and he wants to know what a fish crow is.
Fish crow is a different species from the American crow. It's slightly smaller, and you can find them in New Hampshire if you go over towards the seacoast. You don't have to go all the way to the seacoast, but you have to get a lot closer than here. And you can tell when they're around, because instead of going call, 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 they go caw, caw, caw.
Great. Meade, I have a question for you. A lot of your stories in the Meade's Tall Tales that are online and these stories you're sharing tonight are stories of successes. Is there anything, any piece of land that got away from you, that you just wanted and you just couldn't manage to get it? And what happened?
You should have asked me that question a while ago, so I think about it. There's one. It's still possible. Back when we had the Land Conservation Investment Program in the state, this was in the late 80s. This was a mastermind of Paul Boffinger of the Flower Society. And he convinced, or a group of people convinced, the state to pass a bond issue that would enable towns to buy important pieces of land in their towns. And each town had their own little committee. And I was on the Hancock committee. And we decided that the land that should be protected was along North Elmwood Road. And we went all the way through the process of getting it appraised and all that. But in the end, the landowner in question was told by his lawyer not to do it. And so the deal fell through. It's not a total disaster because we switched horses and the town then picked the Valley Farm along Middle Hancock Road. And that's where the money was spent. And the Harris Center actually was involved in helping to provide a matching easement for that project.
Thank you, Meade. That was great. Love it. All right, this is our last story of the night, and ready?
I guess. So this one begins early in the year 2000. I got a call from Charlotte Sobey saying she had relocated to Boston and she needed to sell her land in Hancock, about 70 acres of forest land, but it was key forest land. It fronted on forest land on Jacobs Road and abutted both the Briggs Preserve and the Merrill family farm, the former dairy farm, both of which were already parts of the SuperSanctuary. Charlotte wasn't in a position to give us a bargain, but she did give us the chance to buy it before putting it on the open market. The price was $100,000, which is back in year 2000, pretty steep for us. But Harris Center trustee Francie von Merton and her husband Carl have been exploring the land and were interested in helping us protect it. And looking beyond its bounds, I could see that most of the undeveloped and unprotected land in the area belonged to the Sidney Williams Trust, more than 700 acres spanning the Hancock-Harrisville town line and including the eastern half of Cobb Hill. The trust back in the 1970s had given some of its remote land to the town of Hancock, and in 1990 it sold another 271 acres along Old Dublin Road near Juggernaut Pond to Mary Merrill. I knew about that because I had helped Mary negotiate a lower price for that land. Checking further, I learned that the principal beneficiary of the trust was Jane Green, who just happened to be Charlotte Sobey's aunt. So I had an idea. What if Francie and I paid Jane a visit at Rivermead and posed this question? Water here. If the Harris Center were to launch a fundraising campaign to buy and protect Charlotte's land, would Jane be willing to give us her abutting 700 plus acres to help leverage contributions? We were lucky because Jane's son, Sandy, was also Jane's financial advisor and had already protected some of his own land. So I think Francie and I needed only a couple of visits to Rivermead with Jane and her little dog, and the deal was on. Sandy was great at handling all the details of the gift, including satisfying lesser beneficiaries of the trust. And I later learned that land conservation was, or is, very much a part of the family history. Sandy's grandfather, Sidney Williams, for which the trust was named, was very involved in the early history of the New England Forestry Foundation. And his parents, Nathaniel and Jane herself, were pioneers in land conservation in Connecticut, helping to form the Guilford Land Trust. And I'm happy to say that Sandy is now serving his second term on our board. As for my leveraging idea, other friends of the SuperSanctuary did step up and generously contribute to the campaign. So in fact, we raised more money than we needed, and we had a surplus. And we used that to buy 126 acres abutting that land from the family of Larry Rathburn. And that extended the block, all the protected land block, all the way to Lake Scatuticky's North Pond with its 5,500 feet of lake frontage. What's more, we also received a bequest from Mary that same year, giving us the 271 acres of former Sidney Williams Trust land, including the unprotected part of the watershed of Juggernaut Pond. This is really important because that's the water supply for Hancock Village and well beyond. And as for the 720-acre land gift, it is to this day the largest we've ever received. Now, there's a postscript to this story that I'd like to end my part of it on. Northern Woodlands is my favorite magazine, and it usually features a column called A Place in Mind. Much to my surprise, in the summer of 2002, a couple years later, that column was authored by former Yankee Magazine editor Jim Collins, and he was writing about his cabin on North Pond. So I'd like to read you some excerpts from that as a way of winding things down. When I was 24, I bought an island on a pond in southwest New Hampshire, barely 90 feet long and 60 feet wide, tucked back into the back of a shallow cove. I lived in that cabin for 4 years. I grew to love the sound of rain on a metal roof, the sight of otters and heron and ospreys, and the luxury of cereal topped with blueberries right off the bush. I worried at times about how fragile my little wildness was. One of the town's selectmen, Larry Rathburn, owned most of the frontage on the pond, which he hoped to subdivide into cottage lots. I've been thinking a lot about place lately and what gives meaning to places. I believe there's a connection between summers of our childhood and places we feel most at home. I tell you this also because I have a 3-year-old daughter, and because places of a certain kind are becoming rarer and rarer in New England, and because I heard recently that the Harris Center for Conservation Education had just purchased all that shoreline that I had so long worried about. I'm sure the Harris Center had my daughter and future generations she represents in mind when it made that purchase. But when land is protected, a part of someone's past is often protected too, that part where memory lives. The Harris Center has protected a bridge that connects the past and the future. In our fast-changing, fragmented world, that is perhaps the biggest gift of all. And actually, the Harris Center's past includes one very memorable evening on that island. On the, I think it was the eve of the solstice in 1991. Jim invited the Harris Center as part of a program to come over and spend the solstice eve in his cabin. And I can't remember how we got there, whether it was on the ice, but I can't remember whether we used snowshoes or skis or what. But we sat around in his cabin having readings that made sense for the occasion by local authors and sipping cocoa. It was a great way to spend the winter solstice evening, and it was great for us, literally being on the other side of the mountain.
So Miles, are there any questions for Meade?
Yes. Some people want to know more about you, Meade. Francie would like to know where you grew up and what college you went to.
Oh, really? I don't know, Francie. I'll try to make it short. My father sent me to boarding school in Virginia because I wasn't doing my homework. I was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and watching birds. So I decided I wasn't going to make it. So they sent me to a boarding school in Virginia. And from there, I went to Washington Lee University, which is a good liberal arts college. But I was interested in environmental studies, which didn't exist then. I was a nature boy. So the closest thing I could get was to be a biology major. And I soon found that all the courses were oriented towards pre-med. Well, this goes on, it could get worse. But anyway, let me shorten it. You can ask me this some other time. But shorten it, I ended up taking geology classes, and they actually went outside. I thought, well, hell, I'll be a geologist. So I looked all over the country for a university that was good, specialized in the gradation between geology and biology. And it turned out to be, and also a place that would pay me to go there. And it turned out to be the University of Kansas. So that's where I ended up getting my master's and PhD in geology before I put all that in the basement and did what I do today. It's a much longer story, but you don't want to hear it now.
Meade, I always love that part of the story where your parents have to send you to boarding school because you're not paying attention because you're too busy birding. I just love it. Did they say, if you keep looking at those birds, you'll never amount to anything?
They said, you can't make it as a bird watcher. You can't make it, the world doesn't owe you a living. Did your father ever tell you that? My father told me that a million times. Because he grew up in a depression, so
Yeah. Wow. I know, Meade, I noticed too in your story, so much of the ability of the Harris Center to protect land had to do with really great partnerships that you had.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give just a shout out to, I know I'm looking at who's here, and I know that there's people here who have been so helpful in making those partnerships work, and Meade, your ability to connect people and connect with people, I think is really the reason that, one of the reasons that the Harris Center has been so successful at protecting land in this area. So thank you to the people who've supported the Harris Center, who are here today, and have also board members and people who are out in the audience tonight who have helped in so many ways. So Miles, any other questions?
Nope.
No. Meade, is there anything you want to say about kind of the future look of what needs protecting?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll just tell you I'm a little bit, I think people have been relaxed a little bit over the last decade or so, but you know, times are changing. And the buzz I hear from real estate people is that houses are selling like hotcakes for more than the asking price. People want to get the hell out of the city and get out here in the country. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised. And the second part of that is everybody has learned how to work remotely now. You don't have to be near where you work. I mean, my daughter has been living in Hancock since March. She's a managing physical therapist. There's a Visiting Nurse Association of New York City, and she's done all her work from Hancock. So it just shows you that we can't be sort of sitting on our laurels and thinking that nobody's going to come. They are going to come. So it doesn't mean that that's all bad. It just means that we ought to protect what needs to be protected now while we can.
Great, Meade. I know too that I saw some mention of what a wonderful trip leader you are, hike leader you are, and that wasn't in your stories, but if we ever get to do hikes again all in person and you ever get a chance to go out with Meade on a walk, it is really a great thing to be out in the woods with Meade. Even you just learn things that you thought, oh, I never knew that, and Meade knows it. So it's
a little different from the old days. I'm a three-legged person now.
Good. I like that.
I'm good at bringing up the rear.
Miles, are there anything else that's out there you want to bring up?
I think that's it.
Great. Well, if we were all in person, I know we would give you a standing ovation because Meade Cadot, you are the man we want to know. So I'm going to give you an applause. And I'm going to say thank you to everybody tonight who came to hear Meade's stories. And I would love to encourage you, if you want to read more about Meade's incredible rich history with the Harris Center, making it what it is today, visit his Meade's Tall Tales on our website. They're really wonderful. And wait, there's even a video, right, Meade? Tell us about the video of you.
Which one?
The one where you're telling some of your tall tales.
Isn't that right at the beginning? I don't know.
Yeah, it's right at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's great.
I don't know what you want me to say. I mean,
well,
there I am.
Give it a plug. Check it out. So check that out, and yeah, thank you, and a special thanks to Meade and for.
Well, I want to thank Susie for the great job of putting together the slides that sort of went along with what I was saying. That was quite a challenge.
Well, it wasn't that hard, Meade. You did all the hard work. So thank you guys, and Miles, thank you for all your support and work. So thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Meade.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Meade. You're awesome.